Woman lost in 1975. 50 years later, granddaughter finds a hidden Polaroid and discovers the attic smelled of time itself, dry, brittle scent of forgotten paper, cedar planks, and the ghosts of 50 winters. Rain lashed against the single dormer window, each drop a tiny fist pounding on the glass, a frantic rhythm against the house's steady, groaning silence. For Chloe, the sound was a comfort, a cocoon of noise that held the sprawling emptiness of her late grandmother's house at bay. It had been 6 months since the funeral, 6 months of excuses and delays. But the final notice from the estate lawyer sat on the yellowed Formica countertop downstairs. Liquidate or occupy. So here she was, on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like a permanent midnight, tasked with dismantling a life she'd only ever known in sepia-toned photographs and clipped, evasive anecdotes. Her grandmother, Eleanor Vance, had been a woman carved from granite and secrets. She never spoke of the past, not really. Her husband, Chloe's grandfather, had died before Chloe was born, and Eleanor's sister, the one whose name was a whisper in the family history, had simply vanished. Lost was the word Eleanor used, a sterile, bloodless term for a person who had ceased to exist. Clara, that was her name. A ghost in the family tree. Chloe wrestled with a heavy steamer trunk in the far corner of the attic, the one tucked under the eaves, cloaked in a shroud of cobwebs that clung to her sweater. Like grasping fingers, the brass latches were stiff with corrosion, groaning in protest as she forced them open. The trunk exhaled a musty breath of mothballs and old wool. Inside, neatly folded and preserved in tissue paper, were Eleanor's wedding dress, a collection of baby clothes that must have been her father's, and a stack of leather-bound photo albums. Chloe's fingers, numb with cold, traced the gold-embossed title on the first album, Our Beginning, 1974. She sat on the dusty floorboards, the single, bare bulb overhead casting long dancing shadows, and opened it. There they were, Eleanor and a man Chloe didn't recognize, beaming, impossibly young. He had a shock of dark hair and a smile that seemed to take up his whole face. This wasn't her grandfather, a stern-looking man she knew from a single portrait. In the hall, this man was vibrant. The photos chronicled a whirlwind romance, picnics in sun-drenched fields, laughter on a carousel, a formal dance where Eleanor looked like a movie star in a shimmering gown. His name, written in elegant cursive beneath a photo of them on a sailboat, was Richard. A knot of confusion tightened in Chloe's stomach. Her grandmother had never mentioned Richard. The official story was that Eleanor had met and married Grandpa, Thomas, in a matter of months. This album told a different story, a story of a deep and passionate love that had been deliberately erased. She flipped through the pages, her sense of unease growing. The joyous photos continued through 1974 and into early 1975. Then, abruptly, they stopped. The last few pages of the album were empty. The black paper, stark and accusing. Tucked into the back flap of the album was a small, brittle envelope. Chloe's name was written on it in her grandmother's spidery, aged hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment you see in movies. A posthumous confession. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. Inside wasn't a letter, but a single, small key, and a folded yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline was a gut punch. Local man, Richard Collier, dies in tragic boating accident. Fiancée Eleanor Vance, devastated. The date was May 17, 1975. The key. It was small and ornate, the kind for a diary or a jewelry box. Chloe's eyes scanned the cluttered attic. What did it open? Her gaze fell upon a small, lacquered music box on a dusty shelf, a ballerina frozen mid-pirouette on its lid. She'd always assumed it was just a keepsake. She picked it up, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key into the tiny lock. It turned with a soft, metallic click. The lid lifted. The tinkling, off-key melody of Clair de Lune began to play, a ghostly tune in the oppressive silence. But it wasn't a jewelry box. The velvet-lined interior was empty, save for a false bottom. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She pried at the edge with a fingernail, and the panel lifted away. And there it was. It was a single Polaroid photograph. Its colors faded to a sickly greenish yellow. The white border warped with age, but the image was sickeningly clear. A woman was lying on a forest floor, tangled in a heap of autumn leaves. Her eyes were open, wide with a vacant, horrifying stare. Her mouth was a silent O of shock. A dark ugly bruise marred the side of her face, and her floral dress was torn at the shoulder. It was a picture of someone who was not sleeping, someone who would never wake up again. Chloe's mind reeled, struggling to process the image. The woman was beautiful, with long dark hair spread like a halo around her head. She looked familiar. With a jolt of ice-cold recognition, Chloe realized why. She had the same high cheekbones, the same delicate jawline as the woman in the photograph. On her own bedside table, the one of her grandmother's lost sister. It was Clara. This wasn't a picture of a woman who had simply walked away from her life. This was a picture of a body, a murder, and it had been hidden here, in this house for 50 years. But it was the detail in the bottom right corner of the photograph that made the air leave Chloe's lungs in a strangled gasp. Partially obscured by the white border, almost blending into the shadows of the leaves, was a man's hand. It was just a hand, but it was there, an undeniable presence in the frame. And on the ring finger was a gold signet ring, the engraved crest just visible if you tilted the photo to catch the light. Chloe knew that ring. She had seen it just moments ago, in the photo album, on the hand of the vibrant, smiling man. The man her grandmother was supposed to marry. Richard Collier. The man who had supposedly died in a boating accident. The music box tinkled its final discordant notes and fell silent. The rain hammered against the window, a relentless, angry assault. The house groaned around her, no longer a place of quiet mourning, but a tomb of secrets. Her grandmother, the stoic granite woman, hadn't just lost a sister and a fiancé, she had hidden this. She had lived a half-century of life, on top of this single, horrifying photograph. Why? The question screamed in Chloe's mind, a raw, piercing sound that drowned out the storm. Why hide a picture of your dead sister? Why was the man who was supposed to be dead in that same picture, his hand resting near her body, as if he were the one who had taken it? The timelines didn't match. The stories were lies. Everything she thought she knew was a carefully constructed fiction, and it was unraveling, thread by horrifying thread. In her hands, a sudden loud creak echoed from the floorboards behind her. Chloe froze, her blood turning to ice. She wasn't alone. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before, charged with an unspoken threat. She held her breath, straining to hear over the pounding of her own heart and the fury of the storm. Nothing had she imagined it. The old house was full of noises, groans and sighs as it settled on its foundations. She told herself it was nothing, just the wind, just an old house. Slowly, shakily, she rose to her feet, clutching the Polaroid so tightly the edges dug into her palm. She had to get out of the attic, out of the house. She had to think, to breathe air that wasn't thick with dust and lies. She turned, her eyes darting into the cavernous darkness of the eaves. The bare bulb cast her own shadow, long and distorted against the far wall. A looming, hunched figure. And that's when she saw it. Tucked away in the deepest, darkest corner, almost completely hidden behind a stack of old suitcases and a shrouded floor lamp, was a chair. An old wing-backed armchair. And in the chair, a shape. A silhouette. Someone was sitting there, had been sitting there, watching her. In the suffocating silence of the attic. The figure leaned forward. Just slightly, and the faint light caught the glint of something in their hand. It was long and thin, and metallic. A floorboard creaked again, a deliberate, measured sound. It wasn't the house settling. It was the sound of a foot shifting its weight. Chloe's scream was a raw, primal thing, swallowed by the storm. She stumbled backward, tripping over the open trunk, her limbs refusing to obey. The Polaroid fluttered from her grasp, landing on the dusty floorboards, the vacant eyes of the dead woman staring up at the bare bulb. The figure in the chair didn't move, didn't speak. It just sat there, A silent, terrifying sentinel in the heart of a 50-year-old mystery. Who were they? How long had they been there? The questions were a swarm of bees in her skull, frantic and stinging. The only certainty she had was the cold, absolute terror that flooded her veins. She hadn't just found a secret, she had walked into a trap. Downstairs, a door slammed shut with a violent, echoing boom that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The sound wasn't from the wind, it was the heavy sound of the front door. The bolt sliding home, she was locked in with the watcher in the attic and the ghost on the floor. The storm raged outside, a symphony for the horror unfolding within. Chloe scrambled away, crab-walking backward until she hit the rough-hewn wall, the splinters digging into her back. Her eyes were fixed on the silhouette, a black hole of terror in the dim light. The metallic object in their hand glinted again. It wasn't a knife. It was a cane, an old man's cane. The figure, slowly, deliberately, began to rise. The year was 1975. And Clara Bishop was drowning in sunlight. It was the kind of cloying, humid August heat that pressed down on the small town of Havenwood, Ohio, making the very air feel thick and heavy. She felt it most in the back of the diner, where she worked 6 days a week. The air, a greasy soup of sizzling bacon and stale coffee. But the heat wasn't just in the air, it was in the looks she got, the way men's eyes would linger a second. Too long, a suffocating warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. Clara was beautiful, and in a town like Havenwood, beauty was a currency and a curse. She was 19, with hair the color of midnight and eyes the shade of a summer storm cloud, a restless energy humming just beneath her skin. She dreamed of cities, of anonymity, of a life that wasn't mapped out for her from cradle to grave. Her older sister, Eleanor, didn't understand. Eleanor was the sun to Clara's shadow. Steady, practical, and radiant. She was engaged to Richard Collier, the golden boy of Havenwood, heir to the Collier timber fortune. Richard was everything a girl was supposed to want. Handsome, wealthy, and powerful. He moved through the world with an easy, confident grace. His smile, a weapon that disarmed mothers and charmed daughters. He and Eleanor were the town's royalty. Their upcoming wedding, a local event on par with the county fair. Clara hated him. She saw the flicker of something cold and possessive in his eyes when he looked at Eleanor. A proprietary glint that everyone else mistook for devotion. She saw the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he was displeased, the subtle tightening of his jaw. She'd tried to warn Eleanor, once. "There's something off about him," she'd murmured, washing dishes side by side in their small kitchen. Eleanor had just laughed. A light tinkling sound. "Oh, Clara, you're just jealous. You see darkness everywhere." After that, Clara kept her thoughts to herself. A bitter stone in her stomach. The secret witness was a boy named Sam Jones. He wasn't a boy. Really, he was 20, but his lanky frame and perpetually startled expression made him seem younger. Sam was the town's invisible man. He worked at the gas station on the edge of town, his hands permanently stained with grease. His voice so quiet, people often spoke over him without realizing he'd started a sentence. Sam had a limp from a childhood bout with polio, a detail that made him even more invisible to the town's vibrant youth. But Sam saw everything. From his perch behind the gas pumps, he was the silent chronicler of Havenwood's comings and goings, its secrets, and its sins. And he was desperately, hopelessly in love with Clara Bishop. He never spoke to her, not really. Just stammered a filler up when her beat-up Ford Falcon sputtered into the station. But he watched her. He watched the way her hair caught the afternoon light, the determined set of her jaw as she counted out her meager tips to pay for the gas. He saw the weariness in her eyes that no one else seemed to notice, the faint tremor in her hands when a car full of gearing boys drove by the diner. He saw her, not as an object of beauty, but as a person, and in Havenwood, that was a rare and dangerous thing. Richard Collier was a man of appetites. His father, Augustus Collier, was the town's patriarch, a ruthless, domineering man who had built his empire with calloused hands and a cold heart. Augustus saw Richard not as a son, but as a legacy. He had groomed him for power, indulged his whims, and cleaned up his messes. And Richard had many messes. There were whispers a girl in the next town over who had left abruptly, a bar fight that had been quietly settled, a reckless streak that Augustus's money always managed to smooth over. Richard felt entitled to the world, and most of all, he felt entitled to Eleanor Bishop. She was the perfect accessory, beautiful and respectable. A woman who would look good on his arm and produce the requisite airs. The problem was Clara. She was a thorn in his side, a disruption to the perfect picture he was painting. She looked at him with an unnerving clarity, her stormy eyes seeing past the charming facade to the rot beneath. He could feel her disdain like a physical presence, and it infuriated him. He was Richard Collier. People didn't disdain him. They fawned, they feared, they admired. Her quiet defiance was a challenge he couldn't ignore. He began to subtly torment her. Small things, at first, an order at the diner that he would claim was wrong, his voice laced with a condescending sweetness. That made Clara's skin crawl. He'd leave an insultingly small tip, or accidentally knock a glass of water into her lap, apologizing with that perfect hollow smile while Eleanor rushed to dab at the stain, chiding Clara for being clumsy. He was an artist of passive aggression, painting her as difficult, moody, and ungrateful. Eleanor, blinded by love and the promise of a perfect future, saw nothing. She just saw her difficult younger sister acting out. Jealous of her happiness, one sweltering evening in late September, the tension finally snapped. Clara was walking home from her late shift at the diner, the streets empty and silent under the buzz of the streetlights. A car slowed beside her, its headlights pinning her like a frightened deer. It was Richard's gleaming black Cadillac. He was alone. "Need a ride, little sister?" he called out, his voice smooth as silk but with an undercurrent of something sharp and dangerous. "I'm fine," Clara said, her voice tight. Picking up her pace, the car crawled along beside her. "Don't be like that. It's late. A pretty thing like you shouldn't be walking alone." The words were a compliment and a threat all at once. "I said, I'm fine." He laughed, a low, unpleasant sound. "You know your sister worries about you. She thinks you're unhappy. I think you just like the attention." He pulled the car over, blocking her path on the narrow sidewalk, and got out. In the harsh glare of the headlights, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. He was much bigger than her, a wall of expensive fabric and simmering menace. "Get out of my way, Richard." "Or what?" He took a step closer, crowding her against the brick wall of a storefront. He smelled of whiskey and something else, something acrid and proprietary. "You'll tell Eleanor. Go ahead. Who do you think she'll believe, me or her jealous, hysterical little sister?" He reached out, his hand closing around her upper arm. His grip was like steel. "You need to learn your place, Clara. You're going to be my family. And in my family, we show respect." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Clara's anger. This wasn't the charming golden boy. This was the man she had sensed all along. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Let go of me." His eyes, dark and unreadable, roamed over her face, her body. "I could have you," he whispered, his voice a venomous caress. "Right here. And no one would believe you. They'd say you asked for it. They'd say you've had it coming." Tears of rage and terror stung her eyes. She did the only thing she could think of. She spat in his face. For a moment, there was a stunned, dangerous silence. The glob of saliva slid slowly down his cheek. His charming mask shattered, and for a split second, she saw the real Richard Collier. It was a vision of pure, reptilian rage. His eyes went black. His hand tightened on her arm, his knuckles white. He raised his other hand, and she flinched, bracing for the blow. But it never came. From the darkness across the street, a voice, thin but clear-cut through the night. "Leave her alone." Richard froze. They both turned. Sam Jones was standing under the flickering light of the gas station sign, a tire iron gripped in his white-knuckled hand. He was trembling, his face pale with terror, but he stood his ground. The invisible man, making himself seen. Richard stared at him. A look of utter disbelief on his face, as if a cockroach had just spoken to him in perfect English. Then he looked back at Clara, a slow predatory smile spreading across his lips. It was a smile of pure contempt. He released her arm, shoving her back against the wall. He gave Sam a long, dismissive look, a look that said, "I'll deal with you later," before getting back into his Cadillac. He shot Clara one last look, a look that was a promise of future retribution, and then the car roared to life and sped off into the night, leaving behind only the smell of exhaust and the suffocating silence. Clara leaned against the brick wall, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Sam limped across the street, the tire iron still held in his hand like a talisman. He stopped a few feet away from her, his face a mixture of fear and concern. Are you okay? He stammered. Clara couldn't speak. She could only nod, her throat tight with unshed tears. She looked at this quiet, unassuming boy who had just stood up to the most powerful man in town, all for her. In that moment, she didn't see the limp or the grease-stained hands. She saw a hero. "He won't forget this," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. "For either of us." Sam just looked at her, his heart aching with a love he knew he could never express. "I don't care," he said, and it was the truest thing he had ever said in his life. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that Richard Collier was not a man who forgave. He had not prevented a storm. He had merely delayed it, and when it came, it would be a hurricane. The encounter on the street changed everything. It solidified Richard's hatred for Clara and marked Sam as an enemy. For Clara, it was the final, terrifying confirmation of her instincts. Richard wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. Her fear for Eleanor became a frantic, desperate thing. She had to make her sister see the truth. But how? Eleanor was cocooned in a fantasy, a dream of white lace and happily ever after, and she refused to be woken up. Clara's days became a blur of anxiety. She felt Richard's eyes on her everywhere. A car that looked like his parked across from the diner. A silent phone call in the middle of the night. He was toying with her, a cat with a cornered mouse, enjoying her fear. The small town that had once felt suffocating now felt like a prison. Every smiling face, every friendly wave, felt like a lie. No one saw the monster in their midst, or if they did, they chose to look away. Augustus Collier's money and influence were a shield that made Richard untouchable. Eleanor, meanwhile, was floating on a cloud of wedding preparations. The invitations had been sent, the dress was being fitted, the church was booked. She chatted endlessly about flower arrangements and cake flavors, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Clara's attempts to talk to her were met with increasing frustration. "You're being paranoid," Clara Eleanor said one afternoon, holding up a swatch of pale blue fabric. "For the bridesmaids' dresses, what do you think?" "I think he's a liar," Clara blurted out, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I think he's cruel, and he's hiding something." Eleanor's face hardened. She put the fabric down, her joy evaporating like mist. "We're not doing this again. I love him, he loves me. Why can't you be happy for me? Why do you always have to ruin everything?" "Because I love you," Clara's voice cracked. "And I'm scared for you. You're not scared for me." "You're jealous," Eleanor shot back, her voice cold. "You've always been jealous. You can't stand to see me happy. Well, I won't let you poison this. If you can't support me, then just stay out of it." The words were a slap in the face, a dismissal of Clara's genuine, terrified love. The chasm between the sisters, once a small crack, was now a gaping canyon. Betrayed and isolated, Clara felt a creeping desperation. If her own sister wouldn't believe her, who would? She was alone in this. Or almost alone. There was Sam. She found herself making excuses to go to the gas station. Her old Falcon suddenly needing its oil checked, its tires inflated. They didn't talk about Richard. They didn't have to. The fear was a shared, unspoken language between them. They spoke of other things, her dreams of Chicago, his love of photography. He had an old Pentax camera he'd bought with a year's worth of saved tips. He showed her his pictures, black and white photos of the world she found so oppressive. But in his pictures, it was different. He found a quiet beauty in the cracked pavement, a lonely dignity in a gnarled oak tree, a story in the face of a weathered farmer. He saw the world in a way no one else did. He saw her. The first frost of autumn had silvered the edges of the dying leaves. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and decay. The wedding was 3 weeks away. Clara's desperation had hardened into a reckless resolve. If no one would believe her words, she would find them proof. She didn't know what she was looking for, exactly. A letter, a record. Anything that would rip the mask off Richard Collier. She knew he often used his family's old hunting cabin, a secluded spot deep in the woods miles outside of town. He'd take his friends there for poker games and drunken weekends, far from the prying eyes of Havenwood. Eleanor hated the place, calling it primitive and dirty. But Clara had a hunch. A man like Richard needed a place to hide his true self. The cabin was the most likely spot. She waited for a night she knew he'd be in town, at a dinner with his father and the mayor. She told Eleanor she was going to a movie. Then she drove her Falcon to the edge of the woods, parking it in a hidden alcove of trees. The rest of the way she would have to go on foot. She had a flashlight and a crowbar she'd taken from the gas station's garage. Sam had given it to her, his face pale with worry. "This is a bad idea, Clara. It's the only idea I have left," she'd told him. The woods were a terrifying maze of black trunks and grasping branches. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through her. The moon was a sliver of bone behind a scrim of clouds. It took her over an hour to find it, a dark, squat shape against the slightly less black sky. The Collier cabin. Silence. The place felt deserted. She circled it once, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The windows were dark. She went to the back door. It was locked, a heavy-duty padlock securing it. This was it. She jammed the end of the crowbar into the hasp, putting all her weight into it. The wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot in the silent woods. The lock broke free. She pushed the door open, her flashlight beam cutting a nervous swath through the darkness within. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of whiskey, cheap cigars, and something else, something vaguely unpleasant and metallic. The main room was rustic and masculine, a stone fireplace, a poker table, a few threadbare armchairs, empty beer bottles and overflowing ashtrays littered every surface. She began to search, her movements frantic and clumsy. She rifled through drawers, her light dancing over old magazines, fishing tackle, and greasy rags. Nothing. She checked under the cushions behind the bar. Just more dirt and forgotten trash. A wave of despair washed over her. She'd been wrong. There was nothing here. She was just a paranoid, jealous sister. Just as Eleanor and Richard had said. She was about to give up, when her light caught something under the poker table. A glint of metal. She knelt down, reaching into the dust and grime. Her fingers closed around a small, flat, rectangular object. A silver cigarette case. It was monogrammed, but not with Richard's initials. A.C. Augustus Collier. She flicked it open. Inside, instead of cigarettes, was a small stack of photographs, held together with a rubber band. They were not family snapshots. They were grainy, poorly lit pictures of people in various states of undress, their faces blurred or turned away from the camera. They were sordid and cheap. But it was the last photo in the stack that made her stomach clench with revulsion. It was a picture of a very young woman, no older than 16, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide with fear. And standing behind her, a possessive hand on her shoulder, his face clear as day in the harsh flash of the camera, was Richard Collier. He was smiling that same charming, predatory smile. This was it. This was the proof. This was the ugliness she knew was hiding beneath the surface. A wave of nausea and triumph washed over her. She shoved the cigarette case into her pocket, her mind racing. She had to show Eleanor. She had to show everyone. This would be the end of Richard Collier. She was halfway back to her car, stumbling through the dark woods, her flashlight beam bouncing erratically, when she heard it. The low, guttural growl of an engine. Headlights cut through the trees, sweeping across the forest, pinning her in their glare. It was the Cadillac. He'd come back. Or maybe he'd never left. Panic seized her. She bolted, crashing through the underbrush, thorns and branches tearing at her clothes and skin. The car door slammed. A voice roared her name, a sound of pure, unrestrained fury. Clara. She ran, fueled by pure terror. But he was faster. The woods that had been her cover were now a trap. He was crashing through the trees behind her, getting closer, his heavy footsteps like drumbeats of doom. She could hear his ragged, angry breaths. She risked a glance over her shoulder. He was a terrifying silhouette against the glare of his own headlights, a monster conjured from the darkness. She saw something in his hand, something that glinted in the moonlight. She tripped, her ankle twisting violently beneath her. She went down hard, the forest floor rushing up to meet her. Pain, sharp and electric, shot up her leg. She tried to scramble up, but her ankle wouldn't hold her weight. She was trapped. He was on her in a second, his shadow falling over her. He stood over her, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. His face, when she looked up at it, was something from a nightmare. The charming mask was gone forever, burned away by a rage so absolute it was terrifying to behold. Looking for something, he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He kicked the cigarette case out of her hand. It skidded across the leaves. "Won't get away with this," she gasped, trying to crawl backward, her hands digging into the damp earth. "People know I'm here." It was a lie, a desperate, pathetic bluff. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that held no humor. "Do they? Does your precious sister know? Or the little cripple from the gas station? Nobody knows. Nobody cares." He knelt down, his face just inches from hers. His breath smelled of whiskey and hate. "You should have stayed out of it. You should have learned your place." He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. The pain was excruciating. "Wanted proof," he hissed, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You wanted to see the real me. Well, here I am." His other hand came up. He wasn't holding a knife, he was holding a camera, a Polaroid camera. "Smile," he whispered. And the flashbulb exploded in her face, a searing, blinding white light. The world went black for a moment, spots dancing in front of her eyes. When her vision cleared, he was still there, looming over her, a look of twisted, triumphant pleasure on his face. He'd done it. He'd taken her proof and turned it into his own sick trophy, a memento of her defeat. He let go of her hair, and her head hit the ground with a sickening thud. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was his face, smiling down at her as he raised his hand. The gold signet ring on his finger catching the pale moonlight. The Polaroid ejected from the camera with a worry, mechanical sound, a ghost being born into the cold night air. Richard plucked it from the slot, his hands steady. He watched, fascinated, as the image slowly resolved itself out of the grey chemical mist. Her face, pale and terrified. The torn fabric of her dress. The dark woods framing her like a tomb. It was perfect. A perfect little piece of art. A testament to his power. He looked down at Clara. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow. Her ankle was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle. A nuisance. He hadn't meant for it to go this far, not really. He had just wanted to scare her, to humiliate her, to put her back in her box. But she had pushed him. She had invaded his space. Uncovered his secrets. She had seen the real him, and for that, she had to be erased. Leaving her here was a risk. She would wake up. She would talk, and even if no one believed her, the questions, the accusations, would tarnish his perfect life. No, it had to be clean. Permanent. His father's voice echoed in his head, a mantra from his childhood. "There are no problems, Richard, only solutions." Augustus Collier had taught him that the world was malleable. That, with enough money and enough will, any obstacle could be removed. He stood up, the Polaroid clutched in his hand. He looked around the silent, listening woods. No one had heard. No one would ever know. He was Richard Collier. He was untouchable. He walked back to the cabin, the crowbar she had used, still lying by the splintered doorframe. He picked it up. It felt heavy and cold in his hand. A solution. When he returned to where she lay, she was stirring, a low moan escaping her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain and confusion. They widened in terror as she saw him standing over her, the crowbar in his hand. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. He said, his voice strangely calm. It's better this way, no more fighting. He raised the crowbar. The moon, finally breaking through the clouds, illuminated the scene in a cold, pitiless light. The last thing Clara Bishop ever saw was the glint of moonlight on polished steel. He worked quickly, efficiently. He was strong, his body honed by years of sports and entitlement. He wrapped her body in a canvas tarpaulin from the back of his Cadillac. He drove for nearly an hour, deeper into the vast timberlands his family owned, to a remote, swampy area where the ground was always soft and hungry. He knew this place. He and his father had come here once to bury a hunting dog that had turned vicious. Some things are just born bad, Augustus had said, wiping the dirt from his hands. You can't fix them, you just have to put them down. He dug for 2 hours, the damp earth sucking at the shovel. The work was hard, but his mind was clear, focused. He felt a strange sense of peace, of rightness. He had solved the problem. He had restored order. Before he rolled the body into the shallow grave, he paused. He took the silver cigarette case from his pocket and looked at the sordid photos inside. A liability, he tossed it into the hole. Then he took out the Polaroid he had taken, the image of Clara's terrified face, his trophy. He couldn't part with it. It was a reminder, a secret, thrill he could keep just for himself. He tucked it carefully into his wallet. He filled the grave, packed the earth down, and covered the raw scar on the landscape with fallen leaves and dead branches. By the time the first hint of dawn was bruising the eastern sky, it was as if no one had ever been there. Clara Bishop was gone. The next day, Havenwood woke to the news. Clara was missing. Her car was found abandoned by the woods. Eleanor was hysterical, a fragile doll broken by grief. Richard was the perfect fiancé, his face a mask of concern and sorrow. He held Eleanor, comforted her, promised her they would find Clara. He was the rock she clung to in a sea of despair. The town searched, the police, the fire department, volunteers. They combed the woods for days. Sam Jones was among them, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow with a terror he couldn't voice. He searched with a frantic desperation, calling her name until his throat was raw. He knew he didn't know how, but he knew Richard had done something. But what could he say? The town's golden boy threatened her on the street one night, and I was there. Who would believe him? The limping, invisible boy, against the word of Richard Collier. They would say he was obsessed, a stalker, making up stories. He was powerless. His silence was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. Augustus Collier made a few quiet phone calls. He spoke to the police chief, the mayor. He reminded them of his generosity to the town, of the jobs his timber mill provided. He suggested that Clara was a troubled girl. Wild, unstable. It was a tragedy, of course, but everyone knew she had a restless spirit. She had probably just run off, looking for the excitement she couldn't find in a small town. It was the most logical explanation. The easiest one. And so, the official story was written. The search was scaled back, then called off. Clara Bishop became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered among parents to their restless daughters. The town settled back into its comfortable rhythms, eager to forget the unpleasantness. Richard's boating accident was a stroke of genius. A month after Clara's disappearance, he staged it perfectly. He took his father's boat out onto the lake on a stormy afternoon. He capsized it in a remote cove, swam to shore, and walked miles back to a deserted road. He reported the boat stolen, then found the wreckage the next day. The story was tragic. Richard, still grieving for his lost-loved sister, had taken the boat out to clear his head. A storm had hit, and he had been thrown overboard. A desperate, days-long search of the lake found nothing. Richard Collier was declared lost at sea, presumed dead. Havenwood mourned its golden boy. The town had lost its prince. But the real genius of the plan was not the disappearance itself, but its effect. It washed Richard clean. Any lingering whispers about his connection to Clara's disappearance died with him. He was a victim now, not a suspect. He and Clara were just two beautiful, tragic figures, their stories intertwined in a shared romantic doom, far away, in a city where no one knew his name. A man with a new identity and a wallet full of his father's money started a new life. He was free. Eleanor Vance, her world shattered twice in as many months, collapsed into herself. She had lost her sister and her fiancé, the two pillars of her life. The grief was a bottomless well. But beneath the grief, a tiny poisonous seed of doubt had been planted. Richard's death, so soon after Clara's disappearance, it felt too neat, too convenient. But she pushed the thought away. It was too monstrous to consider. To believe it would be to admit her own blindness, her own foolish complicity. It was easier to believe the story. It was easier to be the tragic widow than the fool. She married Thomas Vance, a quiet, steady accountant. A man as different from Richard as one could imagine. He was safe. He was predictable. He asked no questions about the past. She built a new life, a fortress of routine and quiet respectability on the ashes of the old one. She had a son. She became a grandmother. She never spoke of Clara. She never spoke of Richard. She locked the photo album in a trunk, along with her wedding dress and her broken heart. But there was one thing she couldn't bring herself to throw away. One day, years after she was married, a small package had arrived in the mail with no return address. Inside was the Polaroid, the horrifying image of her sister, dead on the forest floor. There was no note, just the picture. It was a message, a threat, a reminder that he was still out there, somewhere, that he was watching, that he still had power over her. She couldn't destroy it. To do so felt like erasing Clara completely. And she couldn't go to the police. What would she say? My dead who is secretly alive, just sent me a picture of my dead sister, whom he murdered 50 years ago. They would think she was insane. So she did the only thing she could. She locked the evidence of the crime, the ghost of her sister, inside a music box, and hid it in the attic. She hid it, and she waited. Perhaps she knew, on some level, that one day, someone would find it. That one day, the truth would demand to be heard. The figure in the attic rose with the slow, stiff groan of aged joints. The man was old, ancient even, his body stooped and frail, leaning heavily on the silver-headed cane. A cascade of fine white hair framed a face that was a roadmap of wrinkles, a landscape carved by time and regret. But the eyes, when they caught the light, were sharp and clear. They were the eyes of the boy from the gas station. It was Sam Jones. Chloe was paralyzed, a scream trapped in her throat. Her mind, already reeling from one shock, couldn't process this new one. The silent watcher was him, the invisible man from Clara's story. Please, he rasped, his voice thin and papery, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Don't be afraid. His words were meant to be calming, but they only amplified Chloe's terror. He had been here the whole time, hidden in the shadows, watching her uncover the secret he had clearly known about for half a century. The slam of the front door, the bolt sliding home. That had been him. Who are you? She finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. How did you get in here? I have a key, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Eleanor gave it to me. A long time ago, she told me. She told me if anything ever happened to her, I was to come here. She said I would know what to do. He gestured with his chin towards the Polaroid lying on the floor between them. She knew you'd find it. She wanted you to. It didn't make sense. None of it did. My grandmother, she knew you. She trusted you with this. We had an understanding, Sam said, his gaze distant, lost in a past only he could see. We were the only two people left who knew the truth. After it happened, after Clara I left Havenwood, I couldn't breathe there anymore. I came back, years later. I had to see. I found Eleanor. She was married, with a child. She looked haunted. I never approached her, but she saw me. One day, a key appeared in my mailbox, with a note, just in case. We never spoke of it again. Not in 50 years. He took a slow, painful step towards Chloe, his limp more pronounced with age. He sent her that picture, you know, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The monster, he sent it to her, years after he'd died, to torment her, to remind her he was still out there. She couldn't go to the police, who would believe her, so she hid it, and she waited. Waited for what? Chloe asked, her fear slowly being replaced by a dawning, horrifying understanding. For him to get old, Sam said, his eyes burning with a cold fire that had smoldered for 5 decades. For him to get sloppy, for the world to change. For a time when a woman with a story might actually be believed. He looked directly at Chloe. She waited for you. The full weight of it hit Chloe like a physical blow. This wasn't just a family secret she had stumbled upon. It was an inheritance. A 50-year-old debt of justice passed from her grandmother to this strange, ghost-like man, and now, to her. Richard Collier is alive, Chloe stated, the words feeling alien on her tongue. It wasn't a question. Sam nodded slowly. Oh yes, he's alive. A new name, a new life, built on a foundation of money and lies. He became a titan of industry, a philanthropist, a respected pillar of a new community. He buried Richard Collier, but the monster lived on. How do you know? A faint, bitter smile touched Sam's lips. I told you, I was the invisible man. After I left Havenwood, I never stopped watching. I learned how to find people who didn't want to be found. In the old days, it was libraries, public records, whispers. Later, the internet made it easier. He spoke of his lifelong obsession as if it were a casual hobby, a testament to a love and a rage that had never died. His name is Robert Anderson now. Founder and CEO of Anderson Global, a massive real estate development firm based out of San Francisco. He's old, powerful, and very, very well protected. The name clicked in Chloe's mind. Robert Anderson. She'd seen him on the news. A charismatic billionaire, always surrounded by politicians and celebrities, lauded for his charitable donations. The idea was grotesque, obscene. The man who had murdered her grandaunt and destroyed her grandmother's life was being celebrated as a saint. We have to do something, Chloe said, a fire beginning to replace the ice in her veins. This was for Clara, a woman she'd never met but whose stolen life was now inextricably linked with her own. This was for Eleanor, who had lived her life in the shadow of this terror. We have to expose him. It's not that simple, Sam cautioned, his voice heavy with a lifetime of frustrated impotence. The Polaroid is a start, but it's not enough. A 50-year-old photo of a dead woman. His lawyers would tear it apart. They'd claim it was faked. They'd paint you as an extortionist, a hysteric trying to cash in on a family tragedy. They'd destroy you, just like they would have destroyed your grandmother. Then what? Chloe's voice was sharp with frustration. We just let him get away with it. He's old. He could die any day, taking the truth with him. No, Sam said, his gaze hardening. We don't let him get away with it. Your grandmother waited. I waited. Now. The wait is over. He leaned closer, his voice dropping again. There's more. There has to be more. A man like that. A man who builds a life on a murder. He doesn't just stop. There are other secrets. Other victims. The photograph is the key, but it doesn't open the final door. He then revealed the true purpose of his vigil. Eleanor hadn't just given him a key. She had given him a mission. For decades, Sam had been more than a watcher. He had been a collector of whispers. He had painstakingly, obsessively tracked, not just Richard Robert, but anyone who had ever been in his orbit. He'd followed the career of the police chief who had called off the search for Clara. He'd noted the sudden, unexplained wealth of the judge who had signed off on Richard's death certificate. He had compiled a shadow history of Robert Anderson's life, a web of suspicious business deals, sudden resignations of employees who got too close, and mysterious, settled lawsuits. "He has a weakness," Sam said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a hunter who has finally cornered his prey after a lifetime of tracking. "All men like him do. Pride. He keeps trophies." He tapped his temple. "Your grandmother, hiding the Polaroid, was smart, but he's arrogant. I believe he kept his own. The photos from the cigarette case, maybe more. He would see them as symbols of his cleverness, his power." The plot, audacious and terrifying, began to form in the dusty air of the attic. They didn't have enough to go to the police, so they would have to get it. They would have to go into the lion's den. "His main estate is in Napa," Sam continued, his voice now a low, conspiratorial hum. "A fortress. But he's hosting his annual charity gala in 2 weeks. Hundreds of people. Security will be focused on the event, not on his private residence. He's old now, and vain. He'll be there, basking in the glow of his own public image. It's the perfect time." Chloe stared at him, her mind struggling to keep up. This quiet, frail old man was proposing a heist, a high-stakes infiltration into a billionaire's mansion. It was insane. It was impossible. How could we possibly? She started. Sam held up a trembling hand, silencing her. From the inside pocket of his worn tweed jacket, he pulled out a thick, folded sheaf of papers. He handed them to her. They were architectural blueprints. Detailed floor plans of the Anderson estate in Napa. "Eleanor was a Vance," Sam said, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Her husband, your grandfather. His accounting firm did the books for the architects who designed that place, back in the 80s. She made a copy. She didn't know why, exactly. She called it insurance. She gave them to me, with the key." Chloe unfolded the papers. They were crisp and professional. Every room, every hallway, every potential hiding place was laid out in precise, clinical detail. Her grandmother had been playing a long game, a 50-year game of chess against a monster. She had been gathering the pieces, waiting for the right player to make the final move. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was no longer just about the past. It was about fulfilling a legacy of justice. A silent promise made between 2 women and the one man who had never stopped believing them. The fear was still there, a cold knot in Chloe's stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a burning, righteous anger. An anger that had been passed down through generations. "Okay," Chloe said, her voice steady and clear. The decision settling in her soul like stone. "What's the plan?" The air in the Napa Valley was different. It smelled of money. Cloying perfume of expensive wine, irrigated roses, and self-satisfaction. The Anderson estate was less a house and more a monument to power. A sprawling Tuscan-style villa perched on a hill overlooking rows of perfectly manicured grapevines. It was a world away from the dusty attic in Havenwood, but Chloe felt the same suffocating sense of a carefully constructed lie. The 2 weeks leading up to the gala had been a blur of frantic preparation. Sam, shedding the skin of a frail old man to reveal the meticulous, obsessive strategist he had become, drilled Chloe relentlessly. He was a general preparing his lone soldier for an impossible battle. They studied the blueprints until Chloe could navigate the mansion in her mind's eye. They researched security protocols, staff schedules, and Anderson's personal habits. Sam, using his surprisingly adept computer skills, had secured Chloe a temporary position with the catering company working the event. It was their way in. Her alias was Amy, a cheerful, anonymous girl in a crisp, black and white uniform. As she carried trays of champagne and canapes through the glittering throngs of California's elite, her heart hammered against her ribs. Every smile she offered, every polite nod was a lie. She was a ghost at the feast, a Trojan horse in the heart of the enemy's fortress. She saw him across the grand ballroom. Robert Anderson. He was even more imposing in person, tall and silver-haired, radiating an aura of untouchable charisma. He moved through the crowd like a king, shaking hands, accepting praise, his laughter booming and confident. He was surrounded by beauty, power, and wealth. Chloe felt a wave of nausea. He had built this paradise on top of a teenage girl's unmarked grave. Sam's voice was a calm, steady presence in the tiny flesh-colored earpiece. She wore, "Stay calm, stick to the plan. You're just a caterer. No one sees you." He was parked a mile away in a rental car, a laptop open in front of him, monitoring security feeds he'd managed to hack into. He was her eyes and ears, her ghost. The plan was simple in its audacity. At 10:30 p.m., during the peak of the festivities, when Anderson would be on stage giving his annual speech, Chloe was to slip away from the party, make her way to the private wing of the mansion, and access his study. According to Sam's research and Eleanor's 50-year-old hunch, that was the most likely place he would keep his secrets, his trophies. She had a 10-minute window, 10 minutes to find the evidence that would unravel a lifetime of lies. At 10:28 p.m., the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Robert Anderson walked into the light to thunderous applause. Chloe's heart was in her throat. Now, Sam's voice whispered in her ear. She set her empty tray down. On a service table, her hands shaking, with a deep breath, she slipped through a service door at the back of the ballroom, melting into the shadows of a quiet hallway. The contrast was jarring. One moment, she was surrounded by 1,000 people. The next, she was utterly alone in a silent, marble-floored corridor. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm in. Proceed to the grand staircase. Second floor, west wing. His study is at the end of the hall. You have 9 minutes." Sam's voice crackled. Her soft-soled work shoes made no sound on the plush runner of the grand staircase. The house was a museum of wealth, filled with priceless art and antique furniture. But Chloe saw none of it. Her focus was laser-sharp, her senses on high alert. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the air conditioning, sounded like an alarm. She reached the west wing. The hallway was long and lined with portraits. Portraits of Anderson with presidents, with movie stars, with his smiling, oblivious wife. A gallery of his lies. At the end of the hall was a set of heavy, carved oak doors. The study. The door has a simple electronic lock. The code is his birthday. 0819, Sam instructed. Chloe's fingers trembled as she typed in the numbers. A soft click, and the door swung open. She slipped inside, closing it gently behind her. The study was a cathedral of dark wood and leather. A massive desk dominated the room. A fireplace stood cold and silent against one wall, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves were filled with leather-bound volumes. The room smelled of old paper, polish, and power. "Where do I start?" she whispered, her eyes darting around the room, overwhelmed. "A man like him is sentimental about his sins." Sam's voice echoed his earlier words. "Look for something personal. Something out of place. A safe, a locked box, a hollowed-out book." Chloe's eyes scanned the bookshelves. Her gaze landed on a complete, leather-bound set of Shakespeare. In the middle of the row of tragedies, one book seemed different. The binding was slightly more worn, the gold leaf a little less bright. Hamlet. She pulled it from the shelf. It was lighter than it should have been. It wasn't a book, it was a box. Her heart leaped. She fumbled with the clasp. It wasn't locked. She opened it, and there they were. The breath left her body in a silent rush. It wasn't just the photos from the cigarette case. It was more, so much more. Dozens of Polaroids, chronicling a secret history of cruelty. There was the photo of the terrified young girl from the original case. There were others, of other women, all of them looking scared, or drugged, or ashamed. And tucked at the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of yellowed silk, was a small silver object, the cigarette case. AC, and inside it, pristine, as if it had been taken yesterday, was the Polaroid. The one he had taken of Clara, his trophy, the twin to the one her grandmother had hidden for 50 years. But this one was different. On the back, in his own arrogant, looping handwriting, was a date October 13th, 1975 and a single, chilling word. Solution. It was a confession. A signed confession. I found it, she whispered into her earpiece, her voice choked with a mixture of horror and triumph. I found everything. Get out of there. Now, Sam urged, his voice tight with tension. His speech is almost over. You have 2 minutes. Chloe shoved the bookbox into the empty catering bag she'd brought with her. She turned to leave, and the door opened. Robert Anderson stood in the doorway, his face not with surprise, but with a cold, terrifying calm. He wasn't supposed to be here. The speech wasn't over. It was a trap, I must admit, he said, his voice the same smooth, charismatic baritone he used on stage, but now stripped of all its warmth, leaving only a chilling menace. I'm impressed. No one has ever gotten this close before. Chloe was frozen, her blood like ice water in her veins. The bag with the evidence felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. How? She stammered. He smiled, a thin, cruel smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the same smile from the photograph, the smile Clara had seen just before she died. Silent alarm. On the book, a little precaution I took years ago. He took a step into the room, closing the door behind him. The soft click echoed, like a gunshot. I have to admit, I was curious. For weeks, my security team has been tracking low-level digital intrusions. Chatter about my blueprints, my schedule. So amateurish, I almost dismissed it. But I recognized the obsession. It felt familiar. He took another step closer. And then I saw you tonight, serving champagne. There's a look in your eyes. The eyes of a true believer. The same look she had. He tilted his head. You have her eyes, you know. Clara's the name, spoken in this room, in his voice, was a desecration. It's over, Chloe said, trying to keep her voice steady, clutching the bag to her chest. I have it all. Everyone will know what you are. He laughed, a genuine hearty laugh, that was the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. Will they? My dear girl, you have no idea how the world works. You have a box of old photos. I have an army of lawyers, a legion of friends in high places, and a story. The story of a troubled young woman, a grifter, breaking into my home to plant fabricated evidence in some desperate attempt at extortion. Who do you think they'll believe? He was right. The fear, the hopelessness, it was all rushing back. Sam's warnings echoed in her head. It wasn't enough. He would twist it. He would bury her, just like he had buried Clara. Give me the box, he said, his voice soft now, almost gentle. Give it to me, and you can walk out of here. Disappear. I'll even give you money. Enough to start a new life, far away from all this ugliness. Consider it. A severance package for your grandmother's loyalty. The offer was obscene. A final, arrogant insult. And in that moment, something inside Chloe snapped. The fear, the anger, the 50 years of silenced rage, it all coalesced into a single point of white-hot clarity. He thought he had won. He always thought he won, but he had underestimated them. He had underestimated the quiet, patient fury of the women in her family. And he had underestimated her. She backed away, toward the large window that overlooked the brightly lit terrace. My grandmother was many things, she said, her voice low and shaking with rage. But she was never loyal to you. And then she did something that wasn't in the plan. She opened the catering bag, pulled out the Polaroid of Clara, his Polaroid, with his damning handwriting on the back end, held it up. But she wasn't showing it to him. She was showing it to the tiny, almost invisible lens of the button camera pinned to her uniform. A last-minute addition from Sam, a just-in-case piece of insurance of their own. Say hello to your mother, Chloe. Sam's voice crackled in her ear. A sudden, shocking revelation. Her father had always said his mother died in childbirth. Another lie, to protect him from a truth he couldn't handle. The woman in the photo wasn't just her mutant, she was her grandmother. The line of succession was direct. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just justice, this was vengeance. What are you doing? Anderson demanded. A flicker of uncertainty in his eyes for the first time. My grandmother waited 50 years for this, Chloe said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She couldn't tell her story. "So, I'm going to let you tell it for her." She looked him directly in the eye, the camera on her chest, broadcasting her every word, every image, to Sam's laptop, and from there, to the world. For Sam hadn't just been monitoring security feeds, he had been setting up a live stream. "Tell me again," she challenged, her voice rising. "Tell me how you're going to get away with it. Tell me about the solution. Tell me about Clara." His face, for the first time, registered not just anger, but a sliver of fear. He lunged for her, but Chloe was ready. She spun around, and with all her strength, she threw the heavy book box through the plate glass window. The sound was like an explosion. The window shattered, raining down a shower of glittering shards onto the terrace below. The music, the chatter, the laughter from the party died instantly, replaced by a collective gasp, then screams. Every head turned, every phone camera pointed up at the shattered window of the master's study, and they saw her, a lone girl in a caterer's uniform, standing in a frame of broken glass, looking down at them like an avenging angel. And behind her, lunging out of the shadows, was their host, their beloved philanthropist, Robert Anderson, his face contorted in a mask of pure, murderous rage. The monster, finally stepping into the light. The live stream was rolling. The world was watching. The trap had been sprung. The shattering of the window was the shattering of a 50-year-old silence. For a frozen moment, the world held its breath. Hundreds of faces on the terrace below, upturned, pale and shocked in the party lights. The image was surreal. The girl in the simple black and white uniform, framed by jagged teeth of glass, and the billionaire philanthropist, the man they all admired. His mask of civility ripped away to reveal the snarling predator beneath. Then, chaos erupted. Anderson, caught in the sudden, blinding glare of 1,000 camera phones, froze for a split second. His instincts, honed over a lifetime of deception, screamed at him to retreat, to rebuild the lie. But it was too late. The rage, the fury at being thwarted by a girl, overwhelmed him. He lunged, not for the evidence scattered on the terrace below, but for Chloe. Chloe stumbled back from the broken window, her heart a frantic drum. He was coming for her, his eyes black with a hatred that spanned generations. But the sight of the crowd below, the knowledge that Sam's camera was broadcasting this moment to the world, gave her a sliver of courage. "It's over, Richard," she screamed, using the name like a weapon. The name hit him like a physical blow. He faltered, his eyes widening in shock. It was a name no one had spoken to his face in half a century. In that moment of hesitation, security guards, jolted into action, burst into the room. They swarmed him, big men in sharp suits, their faces grim. He struggled, a wild animal caught in a trap, roaring in protest, but his aging body was no match for them. They pinned him against the wall, his face pressed into a priceless tapestry. Down on the terrace, it was pandemonium. Guests were screaming, scrambling, their evening of polite charity having descended into a real-life thriller. A few brave, or perhaps just morbidly curious souls were gathering the photos that had rained down with the glass, their faces shifting from confusion to horror as they saw the images. Chloe, shaking, her adrenaline starting to recede and leave her weak, leaned against the wall, her eyes fixed on the man who had haunted her family for decades. The monster was finally caged. Sam's voice, no longer calm but crackling with a triumphant, breathless energy, came through her earpiece. "It's done, Chloe, it's done." The stream went viral in seconds. The police are on their way. Every major news network has the feed. They can't bury this. It's too big, it's everywhere. As if on cue, the distant wail of sirens began to cut through the Napa night, growing closer and closer. The police arrived in force, their flashing red and blue lights painting the manicured gardens in strokes of lurid color. They cleared the party, their voices sharp and official, transforming the scene of elite revelry into a full-blown crime scene. Chloe was escorted to a quiet room, wrapped in a blanket, and asked to tell her story. This time, she knew she would. be believed. She had the one thing her grandmother and Granddaughter never had: proof and an audience. The arrest of Robert Anderson was the scandal that broke the internet. The live stream footage was played on a loop on every news channel. The Polaroids, once secret trophies of a predator, were now Exhibit A in a case that gripped the world. Journalists descended on Havenwood, Ohio, digging up the cold case of the girl who had vanished and the golden boy who had supposedly drowned. Old-timers were interviewed, their faded memories suddenly sharp and relevant. The forgotten story of Clara Bishop was finally being told. The trial was a media circus. Chloe was the star witness. She walked into the courtroom, her head held high, and looked directly at the man in the defendant's box. He looked smaller now, shrunken, stripped of his bespoke suits and his aura of power. He was just an old man, his face a mask of bitter resentment. She told the story. Her story, Eleanor's story, Sam's story, and, most importantly, Clara's story. She held up the two Polaroids, the twin images of terror and death, one kept in fear, the other in pride. He called this a solution, she said. Her voice clear and steady as she showed the jury the picture with his handwriting on the back. The murder of a 19-year-old girl, who was my grandmother, was his solution. For 50 years, he built a paradise on her grave. Today, that stops. Sam Jones, the invisible man, took the stand next. He was no longer invisible. He spoke with a quiet dignity, his voice trembling with the weight of 50 years of silence. He told of his love for Clara, of the confrontation on the street, of his lifelong obsessive search for the truth. He was the keeper of the flame, the man who had refused to let her memory die. His testimony was a heartbreaking monument to a love that had outlasted a lie. The defense was ruthless. Anderson's high-priced lawyers tried to paint Chloe as a mentally unstable gold digger, Sam as a delusional stalker. They claimed the evidence was fabricated, the livestream a stunt, but they couldn't fight the sheer, overwhelming weight of the truth. They couldn't fight the image of their client's face, contorted with rage, lunging at Chloe in the broken window. They couldn't fight the DNA evidence found when Clara's body was finally painstakingly located and exhumed from its shallow, unmarked grave in the Collier Timberlands. The verdict came after only 3 hours of deliberation: guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree. The courtroom erupted. Chloe burst into tears, not of sorrow, but of a profound, cathartic release. It was done. Justice, delayed for half a century, had finally been delivered. As they led Richard Collier, a.k.a. Robert Anderson, away in handcuffs, his eyes met Chloe's one last time. There was no remorse in them, only a cold, bottomless well of hate. But it didn't matter anymore. He was powerless. The monster was back in his cage, and this time, there would be no escape. The cinematic payoff was complete, a public judgment broadcast for the whole world to see. Justice, for Clara, had finally been served. The autumn that followed the trial was quiet. The media frenzy died down, the world moved on to its next scandal. But for Chloe, the silence was profound. The world felt different, lighter. The ghosts had been laid to rest. She returned to Havenwood, to the old house that no longer felt like a tomb but a sanctuary. She and Sam spent their days there, sorting through the remnants of Eleanor's and Clara's lives. It was a gentle, healing process. They found diaries Clara had kept, filled with her fierce, restless poetry and her dreams of a life beyond the confines of the small town. They found letters Eleanor had written to Clara but never sent after she disappeared, letters filled with a sister's love and a growing, desperate fear. They were piecing together the women they had only known as fragments, as a victim and a survivor. They were giving them back their voices. One crisp, clear afternoon, they drove out to the newly marked grave in the town cemetery. The simple granite headstone read, Clara Bishop, 1956 to 1975, a daughter, a sister, a grandmother, beloved and remembered. Chloe laid a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave. It felt inadequate, a small gesture for a life stolen so brutally. But it was something. It was an acknowledgement. A final goodbye. Sam stood beside her, his hand resting on the cold stone. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, his voice thick with emotion, "She would have liked you, you know? You have her fire." Chloe looked at the quiet, gentle man beside her, the man whose silent 50-year vigil had made all of this possible. He was the unsung hero of the story, his love the one constant, unwavering light in decades of darkness. She would have loved you, Sam, Chloe said softly. A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. He nodded, unable to speak. They didn't stay long. The cemetery was a place for the dead. Their work was with the living. They had found justice, but now they had to find peace. On the drive back to the house, Chloe thought about the cost of the truth. It had cost Clara her life. It had cost Eleanor her happiness. It had cost Sam his youth. And it had cost Chloe her innocence. The world was no longer a place of simple truths for her. She had seen the monster behind the charming mask, and she could never unsee it. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from the state prison. It was from Richard Collier. Chloe's first instinct was to burn it, but curiosity, and a sense that this was the final chapter, made her open it. The letter was not an apology, it was a curse. It was filled with venomous rambling accusations, blaming her, blaming Clara, blaming Eleanor for his downfall. He still saw himself as the victim. The final lines were chilling. "You think you've won, but you carry the same bad blood she did. It will poison you, just as it poisoned her. I will die in here, but my ghost will haunt you forever." Chloe read the letter, and she felt nothing. No fear, no anger. Just a profound, empty pity. He was just a pathetic old man, trapped in a cage of his own making, his power turned to dust. His ghost held no terror for her. She had already faced down the real monster. She walked out to the backyard, to the small fire pit she had built. She crumpled up the letter, tossed it into the pit, and lit a match. She watched as the paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. The hateful words disappearing into the cool autumn air. She had not inherited a curse. She had inherited a legacy of strength. A legacy of women who, in their own ways, had fought back. Clara with her defiant spirit. Eleanor with her patient silent rebellion. And now her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house behind her was quiet. It was just a house now, filled not with secrets and ghosts, but with the possibility of a future. The past was settled. Justice had been done. The emotional echo would linger, a haunting reminder of the cost of truth, but it was no longer a scream. It was a whisper, and it was finally at peace. Chloe took a deep breath of the crisp, clean air, and for the first time in a long time, she felt free.